Margaret Thatcher earned the title Iron Lady, a title which she'd be proud of, through very, very tough handling, particularly of the trade unions after the late 1970s. She certainly cracked down on the power of unions to strike. She cracked down on inflation, often at the cost of high unemployment, which escalated to 3 million in the early 1980s. She was also a tough Prime Minister in person. She was known to wave her handbag around at other cabinet ministers. She would not often take advice from her cabinet. So she was a tough Prime Minister, and certainly regarded as one of the most influential since Winston Churchill. Mrs. Thatcher was hugely polarising and divisive figure. She is as much hated and loathed by, say, half the electorate in Britain still today, as she is loved by the right. She was very, very tough on the miners, for example, tough on strikers. She was totally opposed to redistribution. She said there was no such thing as society, and she certainly angered many people. There seems to be a sort of national, or at least part national, fantasy that Margaret Thatcher will die, and it's true that many people, I suspect, look forward to that day, and there are often discussions about her funeral, whether it should be a state funeral and so on. And indeed, when she was in power, I think some people in her own party, and especially in the Labour Party, wondered whether her death would be the only way to get her out of office. She's currently very ill and unable to give public speeches, so there's a lot of speculation about her health. On the other hand, she seems to be almost invincible. Well, I think there are two senses, or perhaps three senses, in which we're all Thatcher's children. On the one hand, people like me, who were born actually in 1979 and grew up knowing nothing other than Margaret Thatcher for many years. On the other hand, I think Thatcher's children refers to people who prospered under her premiership, particularly people in the lower middle classes who she offered home ownership to with ex-council estates, and who benefited from her sort of regressive tax system. And I think in the main sense in which we're all Thatcher's children is that the two modern political parties today, the Tory party and the Labour Party, are heavily influenced by Margaret Thatcher still. Her shadow looms very large over both the political parties. The Tory party is still a neo-Thatcherite party. They're still in love with Margaret Thatcher. David Cameron has talked about Margaret Thatcher, and Tony Blair talked about Margaret Thatcher, and New Labour was very much a product of Thatcherism. Well, they are technically on the opposite sides, but Tony Blair was very influenced by Margaret Thatcher. He came into the House of Commons in 1983 during Thatcher's second election victory, when the Tory party was at the height of its power and Labour was in chaos. And Tony Blair realised very early on that Labour had to change and adapt to the political context of Margaret Thatcher. And he has said that he is in a way a continuation of Margaret Thatcher. New Labour was very much a creation, a sort of post-Thatcher creation. Even Gordon Brown invited Margaret Thatcher into Downing Street for tea very early on in his premiership. I don't think it's certain they share the same fate yet. I think it's too early to say, but I think the comparison is a good one. I think that the problem with Jim Callaghan in the late 1970s was he was seen really to stop governing, and I think Gordon Brown is aware of that, and what Gordon Brown is trying to do is to be seen on a very daily basis to be tackling the global financial crisis, and that's what he's doing. Now, some people say that the problem with that is he can't see the wood from the trees, he can't see the bigger vision, he can't articulate what Labour will do in a fourth term. But I think that Gordon Brown still has a chance to avoid Jim Callaghan's fate. I personally don't think it's right that the Tories are definitely going to win the next election, but a lot of people in Westminster think they will. Now, the problem here is that I think that the centre of gravity in British politics and in the media is very right-wing and hasn't caught on to the fact that capitalism is in crisis. I think that, however, that Labour has a big opportunity now to say that capitalism is in crisis and to redraw the political boundaries. You see that with the recent budget and the raising of income tax to 50p in the pound for those earning over 150,000. I think the broken society in many ways is Thatcher's legacy. Certainly in terms of those unbridled markets, the unfairness, the inequality, the unemployment, and the struggle that many people have on the lower sections of society. I think David Cameron's slogan about the broken society is pretty meaningless, and I think that the Tories have to wake up to the fact that actually they need a clause 4 moment. They need to reform their views on redistribution of wealth, on tax and spend, and so on.